Hi guys, and a massive welcome to week 4 of the Get Inspired Body Transformation. So as always, starting off with our weekly weigh-in. So if you haven't sent me your weigh-in results yet, please make sure that you do. This week's might be a little bit different from the previous weeks where you've noticed you've maybe losing 2 or 3 or 1 pound. What some people actually find in the space between week 3 and week 4 is that because they've been drinking so much more water, they've actually put weight on. But don't worry, this isn't a bad sign whatsoever. So at this stage is where I always recommend on stage on week 4, you've now done 3 full weeks. Starting week 4, take your progress picture. So compare your progress picture between week 1 and now's current week, so today, and see what it is there and correlate that with the scales as well. Because like I said, this week's scales may not show as much of a drop as you were expecting, or certainly as much of a drop in terms of the weight that you deserve, but that's because you're more hydrated, so you'll be healthier for it, and you'll have lost more fat because of it as well. So don't just let the scales rule everything. Make sure you take those progress pictures and compare them to see how you're doing as well. But I hope you've all had a really, really good week. And like I say, send me those results regardless. So, as always, starting off again, cheers, challenges, and future. So get your sheet of paper out, pen and paper ready. What I want you to do is write down 2 things that you've done really well this week. So I hope one of them is drink plenty of water. So pause this now and write down the 2 things that you've done well this week and that you're really proud of. So you should now have 2 things that you've done really well this week and 2 things that you're proud of. So make sure you've written those down, and if you don't have 2 things, pause it again and think really long and hard about what you've done that you're proud of this week. Now what I want you to do is write down the 2 things that you've struggled with. So maybe you have actually struggled with drinking enough water. Maybe we need to go over last week's webinar and have a think about how we can incorporate maybe having water bottles in your bag or anything like that to make sure that you are drinking enough. Maybe you struggled from week 1's challenge of having breakfast every single day. Maybe you struggle from week 2 challenge of trying to get in 3 exercise sessions this week. So whatever it is that you've struggled with, maybe cravings, eating out, alcohol, anything like that, write those down now. So pause this now and write down 2 things that you've struggled with for this week. So you should now have on your sheet of paper 2 things that you're proud of that you've achieved this week, and also 2 things that you've struggled with, so 2 challenges that you've faced this week. And now what I want you to do is write down 1 thing that you're really going to focus on improving for this week. So 1 thing that no matter what happens, you are going to do this week that's going to make a big difference to your weight loss goals. So pause it now and write that down. So you should now have on your sheet of paper 2 things you're proud of, 2 things you've struggled with and 2 challenges you faced, and then 1 thing that you're going to smash this week that you're definitely going to do that's going to really make a difference to you hitting your weight loss goals. So what are you going to improve on? So make sure you've got that down now. Now, just to summarise from last week then, it was all about hydration. So we recommended everybody find out how much exactly they should be drinking. So it's 0.033 millilitres times your body weight in kilograms. So if you still haven't done that, you need to get that done now. I often speak to people and say, oh, I drink 8 glasses of water or something like that. And you need to find out how much you're doing, because if you weigh 100 kilograms, you need to be drinking a lot more than somebody who weighs 60 kilograms, because it's all comparative off weight. So make sure if you haven't worked that out now, you work it out. Alcohol, all about moderation. I always say, some people don't touch it whatsoever. Brilliant. Other people have it too much. Other people have it an okay amount. But obviously, you are going to lose more weight if you are not drinking over this 12 weeks period of time. But what I'm not expecting is everybody to become basically a nun. What we don't want with this is it to be a massive, massive diet. I want this to be a full-on lifestyle change. So alcohol moderation is key. Don't go crazy with it. If you don't have to have it, then don't have it. And maybe you can break those habits of having it every night or every other night or something like that at home. In terms of your exercise, every hour of exercise that you do, you should be adding on an additional 500 millilitres of water per day. And that's because it's typically that amount that you'll sweat during an hour. But obviously it varies depending on the heat of your environment, the exercise intensity that you're doing, but aim for a minimum of 500 mils while you exercise. Limit your coffee, said caffeinated drinks to a maximum of 2 cups per day. That's due to the diuretic effect and the flushing out the water. And make sure you're not having it after lunchtime due to the stress hormone cortisol. Limit your fizzy drinks as well. If cutting them out is not an easy option in terms of stuff like Diet Cola that a lot of people have got a genuine addiction to, set yourself targets to cut back. And make sure you're having a really good quantity of vegetables and fruits with every single meal that you can. And they consist of about 90% of water plus they're also very nutritionally dense foods, so they'll make you feel fuller for longer and they will have an effect in terms of the calorie amount. and limit your high fructose drinks. So same as alcohol, stuff like fruit juice should all be about moderation, so no more than 250 millilitres per day. So that's a summarise from last week. So if you can take any more points from that, please do so, but make sure that you stick to that. Find your water. Good news is if you've lost you've lost some weight, then what you can do is as the weight comes down, you can reduce the amount of water that you have to drink as well. Just keep doing that calculation, maybe every fortnight or something like that. So this week, it's a really, really important week. So make sure you are listening. It's all about balancing blood sugar levels. So it's one of the most important things that you can do, not just for weight loss, but also general health and also your energy levels as well. And you'll discover a bit about that why now. So the average person's UK diet looks like this. So this is a macronutrient breakdown. So your macronutrients are your carbohydrates, your proteins, and your fats. So what we have is in the purple, I'm colourblind, so I believe that's purple, we've got 60%, and that stands for the amount of carbohydrates that the average person in the UK has. The green, which is 25%, stands for fat, and 15% is the amount of protein. So the average person in the UK has 60% carbohydrates, 25% fat, and 15% protein as their daily macronutrient content. Now, what this means is basically the 60% generally comes from high amounts of carbohydrates, comes from poor quality carbohydrates, which means they've got unbalanced sugar levels, they're hungry often because it's quickly to be digested, causes fat storage and poor energy levels. It's low in protein, typically around 15% or less, which means your metabolism's lower, your muscle mass is lower, you're not blunting the speed of the uptake for the carbohydrates, and you're getting hungry quicker. And it's also low in healthy omega-3 fats. It's tend to be high in omega-9 and omega-9 and omega-6. So it's recommended you have 2 oily fish per week, which how many people do? Not many at all, unfortunately. If you are one of those people that does, excellent. If you're not, then you need to start thinking about how you can incorporate that in. Obviously, if you're vegetarian, then you need to find other ways. Which is why I guess avocados and stuff like that become so popular at the minute. But they tend to be the average UK diet, 6% carbs, 15% protein and 25% fats. And there is big problems with this diet in terms of what it does to your blood sugar levels, because this is a typical day. In the morning, you wake up. So imagine this is anybody. I've seen this all the time with my clients. They'd say, I wake up, I feel tired, basically because you haven't eaten, so your blood sugar levels are low. And then what you'll do is you'll have breakfast, which tends to be cereal, maybe a coffee, something like that. You're basically your meal is consumed, and because you're tired, you have your caffeine, you have your sugar, and what happens is your blood sugar levels rise, and then it goes above that threshold. So you see the 2 dotted lines. So that's what we call a zone, and that's where we want to be with our blood sugar levels. And if we go above that, what happens is the body turns, basically, there's too much glycogen, too much sugar in the blood system. Insulin is released to remove that sugar from the body, communicates with the body and says, take this sugar out of the bloodstream, and what the body does is it stores it then as fat. So every time your blood sugar levels rise too high, your body secretes insulin and removes that blood sugar level and turns it into fat and stores it with the body. And then what happens is because the insulin levels have gone too high, it's removed the sugar too quickly, and then the sugar plummets right back down to where you were in the morning as well. And then your blood sugar levels are low, so you're feeling tired, you're feeling irritable, you're feeling hungry, and then a poor food choice tends to be eaten again, and then both we're back to where we were. So every single time that the blood sugar level goes up, it's a little bit more fat, a little bit more fat, and a little bit more fat. And that's how people gain weight. No one ever wakes up the day after maybe a binging session or a bad day's food and be like, oh my God, what the hell did I eat yesterday? It's time after time after time. They may be putting half a pound on a week, maybe even a couple of pound on a month. And over time, period of time, what happens is you just slowly put on weight. And it's a hard cycle to break, and it really is a cycle. So I call it the perpetual sugar cycle, and it goes like this. Like I say, you wake up, your blood sugar levels are low, so you eat sugar. You like sugar tastes nice, you crave sugar, and it really has got very high addictive properties. What happens then is once you've eaten the sugar, the body breaks it down and uses it, the blood sugar levels then spike, dopamine is released, so it makes you feel good, and that's where the addictive properties come from. Mass insulin, so it's far too much insulin secreted, and that's because you need to get the sugar out of the bloodstream. So the body's sent basically a signal out and said, there's too much sugar, let's get rid of it. What happens then is the blood sugar levels drop rapidly, your insulin levels go through the roof, and that causes immediate fat storage. And like I say, it'll only be a little bit of fat storage, but every single meal this happens. Then the body craves sugar, craves that sugar high, you crave that sugar high, you're feeling good, you're feeling tired now, or you're maybe at work, feeling irritable. What makes you feel good? You're hungry, you've got cravings, your low blood sugar levels are making you feel bad. So you eat sugar, you like sugar, you crave sugar, it's got addictive properties, and it just goes on and on and on. And the amount of people that are stuck in this cycle is absolutely staggering. And it might not just be sugar, like I say, as in terms of with sweets and things like that. It can be coffees, cups of tea with sugar in it, but it can also be stuff like bagels, bread, anything that gives you fast carbohydrates, any sort of white carbohydrate that'll give you immediate fat store energy. Will cause too much. If you have too much of it, the body will secrete the insulin, and you just get stuck in the cycle all day after day after day. And like I say, going back to this, that is how people gain weight. Is every single time they get stuck in the cycle day after day. So what we want to do is we want to try and break it. But to give you an idea about with carbohydrates, because a lot of people say, well, I don't eat that much sugar, but a typical day will be maybe wake up, have cereal, then for lunch they'll have a sandwich, then for tea they'll have, I don't know, like a lasagna or spaghetti bolognese or stuff like that. But what basically happens with, when you're having the typical UK diet of 60% carbohydrates, you're having too much carbohydrates, because what the body does is it takes those carbohydrates and it breaks it down into glucose, into sugar. That then becomes blood glucose. And that illustration that you've just seen before basically shows you what happens when the blood glucose goes too high with most people's typical meal, because the body has to take it out. So that you can see that basically if you're having too much carbohydrate per meal, the simple fact is it will cause your body to secrete insulin, and that excess blood sugar will be stored as fat. So it can literally turn your body into a fat storage machine, which is what we want to get out of it. Now, there's two different hormones that are generally deemed to be the most important in terms of with weight loss and weight gain as well. So insulin is is certainly the most well known. What it does is it lowers blood glucose, it turns glucose into fat storage, and it's stimulated generally by carbohydrate. We then have another hormone called glucagon. And what that does is it raises blood glucose levels. How it does that is it turns fat into glucose, so fat utilization. So the fat within your body, it then turns into glucose, and that is stimulated by protein. So what we really want is, we don't want, although it would seem like we want one to be much higher and one to be much lower, what we actually want is the body to be pretty much in balance with that. So it's using, so that the insulin levels are removing the blood, so that we've got glucagon breaking it down, and then we've got glucose, the insulin enough shuttling it through the body. So that's something to keep in mind, but it's not something to worry about too much. So what I want you to do now is, you should have been keeping a food diary for the last 3 weeks. If you haven't, I honestly cannot stress that, and I cannot put enough emphasis on how important it is to keep a food diary for you, because people who keep a food diary will lose more weight than people who don't keep a food diary, even if that said person thinks they're eating healthily. Just with the sheer fact of writing down what you're eating sometimes will make you realise what you're actually having. A lot of people think they're eating healthy, then they'll put it down, have a look at it, and they'll be like, oh Jesus, this isn't actually that good. And that's what I want you to do now. I want you to have a look at your food diaries, get out a pen, and what I want you to do is I want you to tick the meals that you think you have done well with and that have kept your blood sugar levels stable, and I want you to cross the ones that have caused an insulin spike. So think about the meals that you've had, look through your food diaries, tick the ones that you think have been good meals, and cross the ones that you think have caused an insulin spike. So take your time now and write those down. So this should take you about 10 minutes, this one, because I want you to really go through it. If you haven't been doing a food diary, please make sure you get a food diary straight away started. You can use stuff like MyFitnessPal to get it going. But like I say, take your time now and get it done. So you should now have gone through your food diary and had a look and ticked all those meals that were good and were healthy and it didn't cause an insulin spike, and crossed all those ones that you felt like you did. So often I get asked of how much sugar is too much sugar, or how should I know how much sugar is in certain things? And there is a couple of easy ways to do it, and one of them is the divide by 5 rule. And what this does is it basically gives you a visualization to the amount of sugar that it breaks down into, that the carbohydrate breaks down into teaspoons. So it'll tell you how many teaspoons you want. And we should be looking to have between sort of 3 and 9 teaspoons, but so obviously the average is certainly 6 teaspoons. And the reason for that is you know when I mentioned the threshold about going just a bit too high, and that tends to be 6 teaspoons for most people. So to give you an example, we have a 30-gram serving of cornflakes, which is one of those tiny little boxes, and that's a serving size that's recommended for cornflakes and most cereals. So 30-gram serving of cornflakes, 6 teaspoons with 125 millilitres of milk, has a total of 31.8 grams of carbohydrates. Divide this by 5 and you get 6.2 teaspoons of sugar. So that's how much in terms of teaspoons of sugar is in a 30-gram serving. Now, just on a side note, is that the average person in the UK, for breakfast, the cereal they have is 90 to 120 grams, so 3 to 4 times the amount of a serving size. So their blood sugar levels are going 3 to 4 times higher than they should be. So if you divide that by 5, you have 18 teaspoons of sugar. So 3 times that threshold, and that's how fat easily creeps up on you, because every single time you're eating too much, it has a few grams. So like I said, the average person in the UK has 90 to 120 grams of cereal. So if you want to work out how much you'd be having and how much you have been having, pour your usual amount, get a teaspoon, and slowly teaspoon back into the container or into the packaging how many teaspoons you've been having, and from there you'll know, because it should only be 6 teaspoons is a serving size. And what you will probably do then is realise how little 30 grams is, and that's because it's not very nutritionally dense at all, cereal, and that's why I always recommend from the breakfast that you got sent in week 1 is something with high protein in, because it'll make you feel, and very highly nutritionally dense, because it'll make you feel much fuller for longer. So keep that in mind. Carbohydrates can also be basically looked at in terms of a view on something called the glycemic index. So it's one that most people have heard about. It's one that obviously in terms of with diabetes and again with insulin, that's what we're essentially looking at. So it was developed in the 1980s to help basically diabetics control their blood glucose levels. But a lot of people, and particularly the NHS are using it as well at the minute, are realising that if you eat generally low GI meals, then most people will lose weight. And what GI basically does, so glycemic index, basically measures the speed that a food raises blood glucose levels. So if you have a food that's high, which is 70 or more, versus a food that is low, what happens is that means that the body turns it into sugar quicker. So if you've got a low GI 55 or less, that means that it takes a longer period of time for the body to turn that food into blood glucose, into sugar. So that's what the GI basically does. Like I say, measures the speed that a food raises blood glucose levels. So you've got low GI, which is 55 or less, medium GI, which is 56 to 69, and then we've got high GI, which is 70 or more. So if we take a look at some of those foods that are counting it, so we've got low, which are 55 or less, like I mentioned, and there's stuff like almonds, walnuts, peanuts, beans, kidney beans, small seeds, sunflower seeds, flax seeds, sesame seeds, pretty much all vegetables bar 1 or 2, and pretty much all fruits as well, and most whole grain carbohydrates too. So they're your low GI, and they're what you should be mainly eating in terms of your carbohydrate content. Then we've got our medium, we've got baked potato, we've got sweet potato, we've got basmati rice, bananas, prunes, cranberry juice, so they're the fruits that I mentioned before. We've got enriched wheat, pita breads, raisins, prunes, so they're your medium GI, so that means they turn to blood glucose quicker than those low GIs. And then we've got high GIs, which are generally ones that you should avoid. So most white carbohydrates are high GI, white bread, white rice, pasta, maltodextrins, which are about the 100 mark, glucose, Lucasade, stuff like that, and then pretty much all cereals as well. So cornflakes, Cocoa Pops, other breakfast cereals, cereal bars, things like that are all high GI because they turn to blood glucose very, very quickly. Another one that's extremely popular at the minute, and that's because it gives you a much more accurate level of the blood glucose concentration, because you could have something that's high. So if you, for instance, had white bread but only had maybe one slice, what would happen is if you just had that as your carbohydrate, so say white bread, you had 2 poached eggs and then you had a load of salad with that, such as spinach, what would happen there is your blood glucose, even though it's a high GI, it wouldn't go above the threshold. That's because the glycemic load of it isn't enough. So it gives you a better indication of blood glucose basically levels and the corresponding insulin response. So it can be found by taking so you do have to do a bit of calculation with it, the amount of carbohydrate that is contained in a food and multiplying it by its GI and then dividing it by 100. So I know that sounds complicated, but I'm going to give you an example as well. So from this, you can find out exactly how much food, why do I keep saying food? Food raises your glucose levels. So for example, watermelon has, and it's the most popular one for this example, has a GI of 72. A 100-gram serving of watermelon has 5 grams of carbohydrates. So pretty much the rest of it's all water. So what you would do is you calculate the amount of grams, so 5 grams of carbohydrate in a 100-gram serving, times by its GI, which is 72. You then divide that by 100, and that gives you 3.6. So that's a glycemic load of 3.6, which is low. So take that into consideration when you're doing it as well. So in terms of with your glycemic load and everything like that. So what I want you to do now, for a quick task, I want you to write down all the foods that you think have a high GI and a low GL. So again, like I said, for an example, there's watermelon, but just spend 5 minutes and think about foods that you think that the body turns to sugar quickly, but you'd have to eat quite a large amount of them for it to turn, even though, like I say, it turns to sugar quickly, for you to gain any weight. So a high GI and a low GL, because these are the foods that you want to be eating quite a lot of, because like I said, they're very high in nutritional value. So take 5 minutes now and write all those down. So you should now have a list of basically foods that you think have got a high GI and a low GL. And make sure, like I say, that you're adding those to your diet. So again, we've got stuff like watermelon, pretty much all fruits, things like that. And what we're not, basically from this, I often get asked of, well, should I completely stay away from carbohydrates then? And absolutely not, because they really are an essential part of our diet. You do need them to help you lose weight. However, for most people, they have really energy-dense carbohydrates, so breads, again, cereal, pasta, and they give you a lot of calories, but not a lot of nutrition. So that's where you need to switch it from having those that are really calorie-dense to those that are really nutritionally dense. So here are a few ways to find out if you're having too much carbohydrate. So an easy way, and we'll do more of this in terms of the few coming weeks as well, in terms of portion control, but an easy way to do it is to make sure that your carbohydrate is contained 40% of your plate. It's one that a lot of people use, but it's not one that I'm massively fond of, to be honest with you. Be aware of the number of grams of carbohydrates that you consume. So in each meal, make sure you're having around 30 grams of carbohydrates. Anything more is likely to cause an insulin response and fat storage. If you're not exercising on days, then really bring that down as well. But making sure that you're not having more than 30 grams of stuff like starchy carbohydrates, potatoes, breads, rice per meal. Divide by 5. Remember, you divide by 5. It's a great way to visualize how much sugar you're having. I really like the divide by 5 for people who go, oh, I'm just going to eat this, I think, because it's there, and then divide it by 5 and they realize that it's maybe 10, 11, 12 teaspoons of sugar, and they change their mind with it once they actually know what they need to do. My most popular one, in terms of the one that I do, because you take them everywhere with you, and the one I recommend the most is all in the hand. So it's using your hands. So what we have there is we have a cupped hand. You can see on the left hand side, and that cupped hand basically indicates the amount of sugary or starchy carbohydrates that you should be having. So that's for your fruits, that's for your rice, that's for your potatoes, that sort of stuff. So make sure that you're having a cupped hand, no more than that for females, and it's 2 cupped hands for males. So that's the amount of carbohydrates you should be having in a meal, and make sure you've got a fist size for vegetables. So that's a fist size for females, 2 fist size for males. So a cupped hand of your starchy or your rice or your carbohydrates in terms of the ones that affect your blood sugar levels, and a closed fist of the ones that won't. So a closed fist of your vegetables. So in going forward, that's what I really want you to do. So this week's task, use your hand as a guide for the carbohydrate portion sizes. So again, just to remind you, it's there. So a cupped hand for your carbohydrates and a closed fist for your vegetables. So 1 cupped hand for females, 2 cupped hands for males, and 1 fist for females of vegetables, and 2 fists for males. So if you've got any questions, honestly, please feel free to ask. Just send me an email, and I'm always happy to help. I check my emails every day, so I'll pretty much reply to you as soon as I get it. So this week's task, use your hand as a guide for carbohydrates, and let's keep going. Remember to take your photos. Again, if you want to send them to me, that'll be absolutely fantastic, but make sure you've sent me your weight across anyway. And let's keep it going, because now we're really going to start having a look at the diet every single week and moving you forward. So have a lovely week, and I will catch up with you all soon. Bye-bye.